Awesome. We are focused in and locked and loaded. What's up, everybody? My name is Spoken Worth, and this is a quick behind the story, behind the origin, the creation, the concept birth of Crucible Chronicles. How did the album even become an idea? Where did this even stem from? What happened that even led me to want to write and record and put together this album? Okay, so let me take you down a trip on memory lane real quick. It goes back a while. Again, like I've said, we've been working on this album for a long time, 2+ years. In 2019, March 26th through 28th, I was fortunate enough to go on a men's weekend retreat in Oklahoma called the Crucible Project. And in this weekend retreat, this men's weekend retreat that I went to, I experienced God's radical, authentic grace in such a way that I've never experienced before. And it really, it led me down a path, and it equipped me for a path of healing. It equipped me for a path of authenticity, of truthfulness, of grace, and in such a radical form that it's hard to put into words. But long story short, on this weekend in Oklahoma, March 26th through the 28th of 2019, I experienced God in a way that I hadn't experienced before, and it really rejuvenated my life as a man, my life as a husband. I'd been married for just about a year at that point when I went on the weekend, and it really challenged the way I was living my life. It challenged the way I thought about myself, the way I thought about God, and it really increased my perception of who God is and how big His grace is, because I had never experienced such radical mercy and grace like I had on that weekend. And so I encourage you, if you're watching this video and you're curious about what that weekend was, just go ahead and shoot me a message, shoot me an email, get a hold of me somehow, and I'd love to talk to you more personally on what I experienced on that weekend. But really, that's where the birth of Crucible Chronicles happened, is this weekend experience. But really, what I've learned from that weekend and since that weekend is everything that we wanted to communicate in the album. And that's why it's taken this long. That's why it's been 2+ years of writing and recording and putting together, because it's been coming together as God's been bringing me together. It's been forming as God's been forming me. It's been being developed as God's been developing me. It's been a slow process, but ultimately it's been a process that's full of growth and joy and healing. And so we wanted to communicate through the album the things that I'd learned on that weekend, and really what I've learned since. Things like authentic accountability, things like authentic truthfulness, things like authentic vulnerability, things like authentic grace and mercy. The things that made up who Jesus was. That's who I was introduced to. I was introduced to a Jesus that I had never been introduced to before. And we wanted to communicate that through the album. That's why the album is such a vulnerable approach. That's why we see the progression of the album go from the fall, which is the journey and the story, the origins of my young child who falls into sin and shame. And at that point in the story, he has no idea if he has any hope for him moving forward. He thinks he's stuck there. But it goes from that to vicious times, which is my outward projection and judgment on the world I see around me and what I perceive of the world around me. But ultimately it goes from that to Man in the Mirror, because in Man in the Mirror I'm learning that if I want any significant change for the things I see around me, I have to first start by looking and recognizing those things in myself. And what I've learned from the weekend and since the weekend is that if I spot it, I got it. The things that I'm most frustrated with, the things I'm most irritated with, the things I'm most angry with, the things that get under my skin the most are things that I often struggle with myself. My judgments towards other people are really a mirror into the reality of who I am as a person. And so I've learned that. And that's what we wanted to communicate in Man in the Mirror. And then it goes from Man in the Mirror to Jacob's Dilemma. And in Jacob's Dilemma, C.L. Thomas does an excellent job at painting the picture and setting the scene of Jacob wrestling with God. And we wanted to do that because Wrestle, the song I did with Jay Crum, is all about Jacob's story of wrestling with God, based from Genesis 32 through 33. And we did that because what I learned from the weekend And since then is that running from wrestling matches with God, running from wrestling with the wounds of our past, or running from addressing the things that we don't want to address, addressing the consequences of our actions, what we're actually running from is the transformative process that God has for us. And so through Wrestle, we wanted to communicate that truth, because I've been learning that truth. God's been teaching me through wrestling matches that there's blessing on the other side of wrestling. Even though I may walk differently, I may walk with a limp instead of how I used to walk, I walk as a different man. The same way Jacob went from Jacob, the manipulator, the conniver, to Israel, the God wrestler. And that's exactly what God's been doing in my life. He's been taking me from Bryce to a completely new man. From this scared, insecure little boy that had to hide and run and repress everything that he's done in his life and that has happened to him in his life, and put them aside and live as a person that I was never meant to be. That man, through wrestling with God, facing the ththings he didn't want to face, can now come out on the other side a completely new man. And that's what I've learned over the last 2.5 years. That's still what I'm doing. It's a process that I have to engage in every single day. And then you notice on the album, it goes from wrestle to a different perspective. It goes into the song Talk Back with Dylan Chase. And in this song with Dylan that we did, it's a really unique song that plays and portrays the perspective of this mental bout between myself and my shadow, between the negative self-talk that I feed myself to the lies that I tell myself. And what you see in that song is that me as a man, I'm finally learning to talk back and speak truth in the face and in the presence of falsehood. I'm replacing falsehood with truth, and that's something that was very valuable to me, that I've been learning, and something that I learned on that weekend in a unique way, and something that I've been learning to do since then is to speak truth in the midst of falsehood, even if it's speaking truth to myself, speaking truth to my soul, reminding my soul the truths of what God has said and what that means for who I am, and how I don't have to be subject to being victim to the lies that my shadow and my past and my wounds will try to convince me of. And so Talk Back is we see this young man that's come out from the other side to live and tell the story of wrestling with God, and now he's beginning to implement the things that he learned from that wrestling match with God. And that's a significant thing. And then it goes from Talk Back to Reborn, or actually Shadow and Gold. And in Shadow and Gold, it's this full proclamation of who I am as a person, of who I am as a man, all the bad and all the good. But here's the thing, it's recognizing and it's accepting both. It's accepting both. It's saying, yes, this is who I am, that's not all that great. These are the things I don't like about myself. These are some of the flaws, some of my weaknesses, some of the things that I'm terrible at, the mistakes I've made. This is my sin, the things that I don't want to admit, the things that I don't want to show the world around me. But then my gold is all the good that God made me, all the beauty that God made me. And see, in Genesis, it tells us that when God made man, he said it was very good. He made man in his own image. And so all of us, myself, you, we all have shadow and we all have gold. There's things about us that we don't want to show other people, but when we hide and repress and deny those things, we live in a way that's not truthful. But when we put those to the forefront and we recognize them in the lenses of our gold and see who God calls us to be despite who we really are, that makes it completely different. That allows me to live in my gold, to live in my power as an image bearer of God. And so that's what that poem's all about. That song, Shadow and Gold, is all about recognizing all of who we are and recognizing all of who God has called us to be because of what Jesus has done. And that's what it's all about. And then it jumps from Shadow and Gold to Reborn. And Reborn is it's the antithesis of the fall. The young child, the young boy has fallen in his sin and his shame, but he's gone through this journey of radical, authentic honesty and truthfulness, of wrestling with God, of living to tell the story, of walking away with a limp and with pain and walking in a new way. And now he's at a place where he can rise from his sin and from his shame, and he can live in a way that's reflective of the work that God has done in his life, in a joyful way. in a peaceful, content, satisfied way. And then the last song on the album, The Journey Continues. The Journey Continues is the meaning is in the title. It's that this is just the beginning. This is not where I find all the answers to my problems. The weekend that I went to, that men's retreat, not all my problems didn't just go away after that weekend, but what happened is I was equipped in such a way, I was empowered in such a way that allows me to now walk this journey in a healthier way with community, in a healthier way with understanding of who I am, and in a healthier way with a bigger perspective of who God is and God's grace, with authentic truthfulness and authentic radical grace and mercy. And so that's just kind of some insight to the origin, the birthing, the creation of Crucible Chronicles. How did this album even come to being an idea? It came to being an idea not just in one event, even though it began on a weekend, March 26th through the 28th of 2019. It began there, but it's been growing and maturing and developing and forming over the last 2 years as God's been working in my life. And so we hope that you've enjoyed the album. We hope that you can relate to this story in some way. And we hope to be communicating clearly the lessons that God has been teaching me over these last 2 years. And we hope that it's challenged you, that it's inspired you, and it leads you to want to deepen your relationship with God and deepen your level of authenticity and your level of truthfulness and your level of grace within your life. I hope it leads you to live an authentic life that's honest and open and vulnerable, because I believe that when we bring the things that we've hidden in the shadows and we put them in the light, there's healing, there's freedom, and there's liberation. Be blessed. This is Spoken Word, and that is behind the stories of how the Crucible Chronicles, my new album, came to be.